What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 442. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources. And joining me on the line all the way from, well, actually the East Coast this time, it's special guest host, Ben Stark. Ben, welcome back on LR. How you been, buddy?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you back. Luis is going to take this week off. Yeah, he had a bunch of busy stuff to do before the big tournaments coming up on the weekend, the Pro Tours coming and all that. So we said, well, we'll give him the day off. We're going to bring in Ben S. So, Ben, we're going to talk Dominaria today. You've been talking a lot about it on social media and on your videos and stuff, and we're going to go a little deeper here, get your thoughts on this draft format. Before we get into that, channelfireball.com, that's the place to go for all things magic related on the internet. Anything you need, they're going to have it over at Channel Fireball, including one of my favorite things, free content. That's right. Right on the front page of the website, you can get awesome videos and articles from some of the best players in the world, including you, Ben. You put up a draft video recently, did you not?
Yeah, I've got 2 videos up now for Dominaria. And the first one, the black-green deck, was a real treat. It was a super fun draft and some amazing games and matches in there.
Okay, cool. So that's a great one for you to check out. And of course, we don't get a ton of Ben Stark videos. So when one goes up, you're going to want to go check it out. And it's up there right now. There's 2 of them, like Ben said. And of course, while you're there, you can pick up anything you need magic related. If you want to support the show directly, you can do so via the Patreon. That's patreon.com/limited resources. I've been posting the decks that I've been winning drafts with on there just to get an idea for some of the stuff that I've had success with. And of course, the Discord is up and running as well. So if you are a patron, you're automatically on the Discord and you'll get some little perks here and there like that. Now, one of the things you also get is Patreon question of the week, but I'm going to save those because I've actually got a bunch of questions from our patrons for you, Ben, and that's going to make up a good chunk of the show. So we're going to skip that for now and go right into ye old crack-a-pack. So we've got a pack of Dominaria here. And let's see what we've got and what... let's see what Ben likes out of the deal. All right, first card out, Gitu Chronicler, 1 in a red, 1/3. You can kick it for 3 in a red to get a instant or sorcery back from your yard.
It's a good common. Card. I don't hope to be first picking it, but it's a good common.
Banalish Honor Guard, 1 in a white, 2/2. It gets +1/+0 for each legendary creature you control.
Nope.
Artificer's Assistant, the little bird that kind of couldn't. This card hasn't really done anything in the format.
Nah, definitely not.
Yeah, it's just bad, right? Another, wow, lots of 2-drops here too. Kelvin Warcaller, this is the 1 in a red 2/2, and when it attacks, you can up a saga by 1 chapter.
So it's got the same power and toughness as Chronicler, but if you have 6 mana, Chronicler can buy back a removal spell. What does that thing do for you if you have 6 mana?
Well, I guess it has the same amount of power and toughness as if that's what you mean.
Yeah, did I say exact same?
2/2 versus a 1/3. Well, I don't know. You said the same. Is that what you meant? Or,
yeah, I meant the same amount. I mean, you can pay 2 mana and get 4 combined power and toughness, but one of them buys back a removal spell when you have 6 mana, and one of them is just a 2/2.
Yeah, no comparison. And by the way, getting worse by the minute here. Rat Colony is our next card. 1 in a black for a 2/1 with some basically irrelevant abilities. The only hope that I saw for Rat Colony was pairing it with Tetsuko Umezawa, and I still haven't seen anybody actually get away with that in an impressive way. So I think I'm done with Rat Colony.
I'm really disappointed in R&D for Rat Colony. I love this set, so I give them a lot of credit, but I like cards like that. Like, I think their value changing based on how many you have and how late it is in the draft. It's really interesting. Like, there's that 1 5-mana 4/4 that, like, searched for another copy of itself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the same thing with the 3-mana 2/2 a set or 2 ago. I love stuff like that. So with Rat Colony, I guess they wanted to be careful because of Pack Rat, but it's not like you're going to give them create infinite copies of themselves. So I think that card could have easily been something like gets +1/+1 instead of +1/+0. And then it would be an interesting card because, you know, if you have 3 of them, it's hard to get 10 copies of a common and limited. If you have 3 of them, you're not going to draw 2 that often, but when you do, you get 2 mana 3/2s. That's not crazy. If you manage to get 3 of them out, you'll have 4 3s. That's powerful. But as soon as they trade with 1, then the others are down to 3/2s. So I think Rat Colony could have been made. It could have been the exact same card and just give +1/+1 for each other Rat Colony you have in play. And then it would be a sweet, playable limited card that would be interesting to try and pick up a lot of, but not overpowered. Instead, as printed, Rat Colony just sucks.
It's just a brick, yeah. Next is Arbor Armament. one of the worst combat tricks in the set. It's green instant, put a +1/+1 counter to a creature. Creature gains reach until end of turn. Doesn't really see much play. This pack has been very weak, by the way. Boy, G2 Chronicler is looking like an all-star. Yeah, same. This next card I've played quite a bit of. It's Windgrace Acolyte, 4 and a black, 3/2 flyer, and you mill yourself for 3 and gain 3 life when it enters the battlefield.
Yeah, I like that card, but I'm still on Chronicler.
Same. Pierce the Sky. This is 1 and a green instant. Does 7 damage to a creature with flying. Okay, fine sideboard card. All right, here's a decent common. Baloth Gorger, 2 GG for a 4/4. You can kick it for 4 and have it get 3 +1/+1 counters.
Yeah, that's a pretty close pick. I'd probably still take Chronicler, but I think Baloth Gorger and Chronicler are pretty close. Like, I would call those both like a little above average commons.
Which is quite a bit below average for a first pick, but we haven't got to the uncommons yet, so we'll see. Next is Guardians of Koilos, 5 mana, 4/4. And you can bounce one of your own historic permanents to your owner's hand when it enters the battlefield. No. All right, uncommons. Here we go. Let's get to some good stuff here. Spore Swarm. It's a nice one. 3 and a green instant. You get 3 1/1 Saprolings.
Yeah, that card's good. Honestly, I'd still probably just take Chronicler.
Okay, so still on Chronicler. Thalid Soothsayer, which is just a cruel trick for those of us who have to actually be in the booth and pronounce these cards. But it's the 3 and a black, 2/3 fungus, and you can pay 2 mana, sack a creature to draw a card. Card's a little slow.
This might surprise people, but I think I would take that. That card's pretty good. It's a slow format. There's a lot of small creatures that get blanked. You know, sometimes people put that enchantment on your creatures, and then you could sack it and draw a card. And there's just a lot of removal. So I kind of like that one. It's not by a lot. It's certainly not a broken uncommon or anything. But I think that's my pick as of right now.
Okay. We have a legendary uncommon. This is Halar the Fire Fletcher, 1 green red for a 3/3 with trample. And whenever you cast a spell, if it was kicked, you can put a +1/+1 counter on Halar, and then Halar deals damage equal to number of +1/+1 counters to each opponent.
That card is good. Not good enough as a gold card to take over the Soothsayer, I think.
And then we do, it's actually a mythic rare. You're going to be disappointed, though. It's Mox Amber.
Well, I take that. It's like $20, right?
Yeah, well, I tell you what, one of our listeners is going to be happy because I give away all the cards that we open on these Crack-A-Packs to a patron. So somebody's going to get this Mox Amber in it. But let's just, do you prefer the Soothsayer or the Chronicler or the Gorger if you're not going to take the Mox Amber at the Pro Tour or whatever?
Yeah, I would take the Soothsayer out of this pack. It's pretty close with the Chronicler and the Baloth Gorger. Like, if a teammate of mine took any of those 3 cards out of this pack, I wouldn't even berate them for it. I wouldn't even care. I'd just be like, okay, that's fine. Like, whatever, Those 3 cards are all pretty close in my opinion, but I personally really like the Soothsayer.
Kind of a bummer of a pack, though, if you were to open it up at a GP or something, and not a whole lot of action in that one. Okay, let's get into our main topic here, Ben. We're going to be talking Dominaria and also some other broader topics as well that our listeners threw at us. But first, I want to start things off with something kind of interesting that popped up on Twitter today. Dustin Stern, D. Stern, who, if you play in the competitive draft queues on Magic Online, you'll often see his name floating around the top of the trophies leaderboard. And he really has strong takes, strong opinions on a lot of these formats. He's also pretty active on Twitter talking about them. And I always find his opinions really interesting because he's got kind of a cool take on how things go. But it also, you get to kind of figure out what he does. Well, what he's done is he's made this sort of, I don't know, like a matrix, like a graph thing that has his listings of the cards by color and then by rating. And what I'll do is I'll put a link to his tweet actually in the description so that you can see what he made. And Ben and I were taking a look at it before, and it's kind of interesting because he kind of has things broken down into these quadrants. Sort of, he's got like 6 through 10, like he has them graded from a scale from 0 to 10. And he says the scale is 0 is unplayable garbage, and 10 would be like Tetsamok level card. And, it's kind of interesting because he has them sort of in groups here, and you can see how he approaches the format just by looking at it. One of the things that stood out to me, Ben, at the beginning was that there's actually no 10s listed here. Not that that's super important. Like, the cards are relative to each other. So if the best card's a 9, well, then it might as well be 100. It doesn't really matter. But he is saying like that he doesn't feel like there's anything as good as Tetsamok was in its own format.
Well, I would agree that there's nothing as good as Tetsamok, but I wouldn't really say there are no 10s. I mean, Tetsamok is one of the best limited cards of all time. You tag all their creatures and then you play it, so even if they have removal, they still lose all their creatures. I mean, it's just a complete joke.
Yeah.
But I mean, in my opinion, like I would give something like Lyra and Demon Lord Belzenok probably a 9 because they don't really dominate the game, but I would give Multani a 10. The fact that it's recursive and there's a lot of self-mill in this format, so if you have Multani, you play cards that like eat through your deck, like the 5-mana 3/2 flyer that mills 3 cards. And then if they kill Multani, you pay 2 and bring it back. Additionally, it has reach, so they can't beat you with flyers, which is usually how you lose when you have a big fat green creature. And it has tramples, right? So it can't be chump blocked. And it
does have trample.
And it counts lands in your graveyard. So if you're playing stuff like Dark Bargain and the 3/2 flyer for 5 to make your library smaller and find Multani, when you play it, it's a 10/10 trample reach. And then if they have the removal, you just pay 2 and bring it back. So in my opinion, Multani is a 10. And honestly, I might disagree with Dustin a little bit more on this. I think Siege Gang probably is the next best card. I do.
And Dustin actually has Siege Gang as an 8 here, along with Varric's Bladewing for the 2 red cards that made it to an 8.
And I mean, listen, you're not going to care if you open Siege Gang and Lyra, Siege Gang and Demon Lord, which somehow, I mean, they're all rares, but if you open a foil one or something, you had to choose, you're not going to go wrong here. But in my...
No, but yeah, but go ahead.
In my opinion, it's Multani is a 10. I have not lost when I've played a Multani, or I have not beaten a Multani. I mean, maybe you can exile it, but that's true of almost any card, and maybe that's why he's not giving it a pure 10. But the fact that you can't kill it, you have to exile it, and there's like one common that does that. I think Multani's a 10, and I think Siege Gang is probably the second best rare in the set.
I got to seal away a Multani today. It's probably one of the best feelings you could have. Like, it's pure relief. The thing was a 9/9 that held off all of my attackers for like 4 or 5 turns, and then I was able to tap it down and get it out of the way. But my God, that feels real good because yes, that card is completely absurd. And then some of the other ones that kind of made it into that upper tier of the 8 or 9, and like I said, there's no 10s. Zahid. Jinn of the Lamp and Inbul's as clutches, as well as Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. That's the only one that Dustin had in the in that uppermost tier of the 8s, 9s, and 10s of the gold cards, which I thought was interesting. And then also, you have to go down to the 7 range before you get to like Karn, Scion of Urza, for example, which I think is really interesting because these are, of course, really hard to pin down numbers on. If you just looked at the cards in a vacuum on their own, that's one thing. But if you look at Karn in the sense that it's also colorless, right, it probably goes up significantly from there because, it's a card that you can first pick if you get lucky enough to open it. And, you're going to be opening colors and have an extremely powerful card on your hands as well.
My guess would be Dustin accounted for that because, I mean, Karn is good, but it doesn't affect the board really when you play. You're not playing Affinity. You probably don't have other artifacts out, so -2 to make a 1/1 is not a good card. Right. And though it can draw cards and it can win a stalemate or whatever, if they're ahead, they can also just attack it. So my guess would be part of why Dustin has that so high is because it's colorless.
Yeah. Okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah. And then the next tier has cards like History of Benalia, Phyrexian Scriptures, Fight with Fire. That has to be the highest non-rare. Yeah, it is. That's the highest non-rare. And then Ariel, Knight of Windgrace. That's the black-white rare that can pump out knights or have the knights gang up and fight one of your creatures. Pretty cool. Down at the bottom, interesting stuff as well. I looked all the way at the very bottom. There actually are 2 zeros, according to Dustin. There's Oath of Teferi and Damping Sphere. So 2.
Yeah, well, both those cards are clearly designed for Constructed.
Yeah, and then the card that you said you'd first pick out of our pack, Mox Amber, got a 2.
Another card that's probably designed for Constructed.
Yeah, it got a 40 or whatever on the dollar scale, but it did not quite get there as far as the rest goes. What else do we have here? In the middle, the part that I was actually looking for, Ben, was cards like the more aggressive cards were kind of the things that I found interesting because, I wanted to get an idea for where he actually views the format from a big picture perspective. And I think I got that. because a lot of the more aggressive cards are down lower.
Yeah, I don't think anybody really views this as an aggressive format.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, don't go too far with that. It's still limited. It revolves around creatures.
Sure.
So it's not an aggressive format, but if you have a good curve, if you have evasion, if you have removal, you're still going to be attacking. I always quote Owen on this. People always talk about draft decks like their control decks and aggro decks. They're all different shades of mid-range.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And the games that you draw the right curve of cards or whatever can absolutely be a much more aggressive thing. Anyway, so that's cool stuff from Dustin. And like I said, I'll put a link to that. So if you want to check that out as a listener, you can scope out with Dustin. He's a very experienced player. He's been playing Magic for a really long time, and he seems to have a really good hold on a lot of these limited formats that he goes super deep on. So this is one potentially very valuable take on the format. So I'll put that in the notes, like I said. But let's get into some of the questions that we have for you, Ben, about the format, and also some of the questions that we got from our listeners were broader in nature as well. So the first things that I got was from Matthew, who says, on your draft videos, he says, which are great, nice, you have gushed about how much you like this format, mostly because of the slower pace and increased complexity, which allows for more interesting decisions. Is there anything in the format you wish you could change or improve, or that you think is bad?
Yeah, so somebody actually said this when I tweeted that Dominaria was an A+. They said, actually, it's good. It's really good, but I would give it an A- because they messed up one thing, and that's Navigator's Compass. So in a format like this, that's slow and there's a lot of splashable removal, it's a very interesting decision whether to splash or not. It's not auto do it. It's not never do it. It's not always do it. It's always a close choice. And you're often faced with, do I take this Eviscerate that I can splash, or do I take this on-color card that's certainly worse, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that really is interesting in those formats is the mana fixing. And if we're not talking about a format where there's just tons of mana fixing, where people are drafting 3-color and 5-color like a Shards of Alara or something, but a format like Dominaria where there's splashable cards and it's slow and splashing is doable, then fighting over that mana fixing or deciding how early to take fixing because it sets you up for being able to splash is really interesting. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a pretty big problem that Navigator's Compass is just as bad as it is, frankly. Mm-hmm. Surveyor's a really cool card. Clearly, it's always playable, so that's a nice fixer that everyone can fight over. And I think Navigator's Compass could have been a not great card in a slow format like this, but playable fixing, and it would have been really interesting. Like Traveler's Amulet, since it would trigger Historic, just seems like a perfect card to put in the set. Why don't you put Traveler's Amulet, which is slow fixing, right? It's 2 mana to search for a land, but it would trigger your historic stuff. You'd be able to buy it back with some of the graveyard buyback for artifacts and things like that, or exile it with Rona or whatnot. And it's slow fixing. It's just perfect for this format. So that's the one thing I would probably fix. I think Navigator's Compass is a pretty big miss.
Yeah, it's also proven to be quite a handful for Luis and I, to be honest. We have... it has been a fight since this format came out to try to get people to not play the card, right? Because, of course, part of our job on the podcast is to present the times when you should play a card that you normally shouldn't, right? That's kind of the interesting discussion point. But my goodness, this card is so bad, yet it appeals to such a broad range of players who aren't like expert level, where they think it's fine. They just think it's a good card, or it's like, it's no big deal. Like, it just fixes your mana, you gain some life. Like, what's the problem here? And they don't see anything wrong with that. They think it's just a fine, they'll run 2 or 3 of them and just be like, well, I needed the mana fixing. And it's like, oh no, that's not how this works. And it's really hard to hammer that point home.
Yeah, life is the least valuable resource, especially if your opponents aren't aggro, which most people aren't really. Gaining 3 is just not a card, and fixing your mana is just not a card. Right. It needs to kill creatures, draw other cards, give you additional lands. Like if it produced mana, that would be a resource because then you use that to cast things. But mana fixing is cool when you throw it onto something. They don't really do this anymore, but back in the day there was a card like Sea-Snid, 5-mana 3/3, tap to change one of your lands into another one. That's like Navigator's Compass, but it's a 5-mana 3/3. That's a card. It's not a great card, but you get a 3/3. Navigator's Compass, you don't get anything. You get no ability to impact the game except for fixing, and that's just not worth a card.
Right. And it's just hard because, the usual argument that we'll bring out would be something along the lines of, hey, what if you replace that with just a basic land of the color that you're splashing for? How would you feel about that? And you're hoping that that's like an enlightening moment where they go, oh, I see. This thing doesn't make mana. Like I'm putting a card in my deck that I'm trying to fix mana, but that's all it does. And maybe solidify that point. But I've gotten a lot of people that are like, well, I could, but that doesn't really fix. Like it's only one color or whatever. I'm like, wow, these are not comparable, right? Like what these cards do fundamentally just aren't on the same level. One of them makes mana. It actually affects the game. The other one doesn't. Yep. Along those same lines, do you think that printing Icy Manipulator was too bold?
Nah, Icy's cool.
You dig Icy?
Yeah, it's cool. It's not that cheap. I mean, it's pretty powerful. It's a good card. It's not one of the best cards in the set. I mean, it's a good card. There's Enchantment Kill. I like that the white and green Enchantment Kill are both main deckable even because of the historic theme. They both kill artifacts and enchantments, I believe. The white one does it at instant speed and gives you 4 life. Yep. There's one of the red common removals does 5 to a creature or kills an artifact, so that can kill an Icy. Yeah, Icy's a good card. I'm not saying if it were up to me, every single card would just be a 5, and we would just play all these crazy battle box grindy games, and no cards would be better than other cards. But I don't have a problem with Icy. I would say it's powerful, but not some kind of egregious error or anything like that.
Yeah, I think it's the card that people complain about the most. They just don't like that it's colorless and that they lose to it all the time. Is there an aggressive deck in this format?
Pretty much any white deck.
Yeah, I mean, because I know that there's some of these curve out decks that you can do a little bit, but they leave a lot to be desired in a general sense. They, even just if you were to hand me like what you would call like a pretty good version of one of these decks, the power level's not through the roof, right? We don't have you'll see in older formats certain commons that tend to anchor these type of strategies. Cards like Territorial Hammer Skull or something like that, where you're like, okay, there's a reason. Like that's where I want to be, and this is the reason why. They seem to be lacking a bit in this format.
Well, that's true, but even Hammer Skulls aside, that's a broken aggressive card. Most sets don't have something like that. What really allows for aggression in limited is when you don't have good defensive utility creatures that can block, creatures that provide value and then block. Because if a creature is only a blocker, that's kind of a problem because it doesn't punish the opponent's bad draws. It doesn't, when they're stumbling, it doesn't do anything. But when you have a format like this, where there's just creatures that create value and block well, then you have a situation where the defensive decks just have a big advantage. If you play a 2-mana 2/2, I'll play a Get 2 Chronicler and block it on turn 2. On turn 6, if you play a 2-mana, you draw that same 2-mana 2/2, I'll play a Get 2 Chronicler, buy back a removal spell from my graveyard, and block your 2/2. The defensive creatures just kind of have an advantage in this format.
How much do you actually like playing the format?
It's amazing. I've played so many good games.
So you really dig this format?
Yeah, like one of the things that I differ on than a lot of people is a lot of people really liked Innistrad, and I think Innistrad is a really cool draft format, but I think the in-game play was pretty bad. The most powerful thing you could do in a lot of games was Traveler's Amulet, or not Amulet, what's it called? The green one? Preparation. Yeah.
Travel prep.
Yeah, travel prepping. And so the format kind of revolved around that to a degree. Or even if you have one of the cool decks like Spider Spawning or Burning Vengeance, you're not even playing limited. You're just trying to go off while your opponent puts out creatures. And sometimes you're basically both goldfishing. Sometimes they would kill you first or take over first. Sometimes you would take over first or make a million 1/2s or whatever. So to me, that's like playing modern. That's not what makes limited great. Limited is great when you're trading down to soul salvage back your 2 dead creatures so that you can then start redeploying them. And, you're on turn 9 and you're up a card now because after your trade down, but soul salvage. That's what the buyback 2 dead creatures is called, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so like to me, this format plays that way. There's big things that if you aren't ready for can get you, but there's removal that kills most of the big things. Even if you look at the rares, that's why I think Siege Gang is the next best rare because it goes wide. So you have to deal with the Siege Gang. You're probably going to lose to their ability to shock all your creatures. But if you deal with the Siege Gang, they still got 3/1/1s. So that's pretty good. That's really broken. But if you look at a lot of the other cards like Lyra, of course, if you don't answer a Lyra, you're probably going to lose. But how many commons kill Lyra? You've got, what is it, Fiery Fall, the red one, Eviscerate, the black one, Vicious Offering with Kicker. It's not that hard to sack something. Blessed Light.
Yeah, Fiery Intervention, the first one. Blessed Light does it
Deep
too.
Frozen, or whatever that thing's called.
Deep Freeze,
Pierce the Sky. I mean, these are just off the top.
Wow, that's
just off the top of my head. And that's not even counting stuff like counter spells, discard, I mean, a pump spell at the right time, the right one, whatever. So that card is broken, but there's a lot of common removal and card drawing. So you have the ability to deal with it. If you save your removal, you can deal with it. And that's how broken cards should be in Limited. You should not have broken cards like the Titans that if you save your removal, you lose anyway because you fell a little behind saving your removal, and then they had this massive comes into play effect. And the Demon does that, but it draws one card usually. It's a great card, of course, but I'll give them, if that's the best rare in the set, if it was just Demon, that's okay. Multani, I really don't like. As I've talked about, I don't think you should make something like that recursive. But it's...
Or if it is recursive, it should cost a lot, like where you can't just do it every turn.
But, you know, it's a mythic. Clearly, it's designed for constructed. It's not the kind of card where you know it has no shot at seeing standard play and it just completely ruins Limited, and it's not a mythic, like Tetzimoc, for example.
Yes. Yeah, those are always disappointing.
Multani, you know, it's recursive. Maybe people think it could be a Trump and standard or something. I don't think it's really seeing play yet, but who knows? And it's a mythic, and it's super broken. But other than Multani, there isn't really that much of that. If you look at D. Stern's rankings, most of the best rares can be dealt with. You have the Zahid or whatever, I don't know how to pronounce that. The Mahamodi for anybody who's been playing Magic their whole life like me.
Yeah. The 4-mana Mahamodi.
Yeah, and Lyra and Demon. All these cards can be killed by all the removal. The Blade Wing is really good for that same reason that it goes wide, but it's only a 4/4. So if they only draw one of it, you can kill it. If they have 7 mana to make the 2 of them, you're probably going to lose. Other than that, I'd say most of the rares are killable. So that's good anyway.
Yeah, and what do you think about that? Because, you know, the removal reminds me of what was it? Was it Battle for Zendikar? The one where there was 3 and a black, exile something, and then 2 double white, you know, Oblivion Ring something, and it just made it so that it kept those were both commons. And, you know, it really kept the bombs in check. Like you felt like if you were able to draft well and manage the game well, that it wasn't simply the act of them resolving a bomb that would finish the game, but instead that you would always have at least access to some way to kill it. And, you know, as you described, Lyra, one of the best cards in the set, is killable by a lot of common removal and some of the uncommon removal too. And, you know, that seems to be like a real hallmark here of formats that you like. Does the removal line up similarly in your mind?
Well, I don't really remember Battle that well anymore. But yeah, I think that's a key to Limited being fun, because let's say your opponent has a 4/4 out and you make the decision to use your removal on it, and then you lose to a bomb rare. Well, you feel like maybe I could have just held on to that removal and maybe I would have lost to the 4/4, but maybe I wouldn't have. Maybe I would have drawn something that could have dealt with it or drawn out of it. So you feel like you had a choice. If you can't answer your opponent's bomb rare, if your removal can't kill it, they just draw it and play it and you can't win and nothing you did mattered. And if nothing you do matters, you're not playing Magic, in my opinion.
Right.
The point of Magic is to make meaningful decisions.
Charlie says, hey, Ben, wanted to say you make the best draft videos out there. He says, sorry, Marshall and Luis, but they are few and far between. Any chance of you making weekly limited content for CFB? Weekly, Ben.
Well, I do have 2 videos up already for Dominaria, and I've made a bunch of What's the Picks. I do really like Dominaria, so that's helping me stay motivated. I really wanted to do more. CFB has always given me the opportunity to do more. It's definitely been on me that there isn't. it's hard for me sometimes when I'm not really enjoying a format. Like when I was playing Ixalan, I made a few videos and I wrote some what's the picks and all of that, but then I didn't want to keep playing Ixalan. So it was really
like when the Pro Tour was over or whatever.
Yeah, like when I didn't have to play practice for the Pro Tour, I wasn't going to keep playing that draft format for fun because it just wasn't fun. And the compensation is enough, but it's not that compelling. So if I'm not doing it for fun, it's really hard for me to get myself motivated to go and make content. When it's something like Dominaria, where I'm sitting here at home doing drafts just because I love Magic and I enjoy drafting Dominaria, then I want to make content. I want to record videos. I want to write about it because I'm thinking about it and I'm enjoying it, and it's just on my mind all the time. I would do booster drafts purely for fun, even if I wasn't playing on the Pro Tour, even if I wasn't sponsored by a website. I would just do them of my own accord because booster drafting is amazing. Booster drafting is the most fun thing on planet Earth when the set is good, when it's Dominaria. But when it's a bad format, like Ixalan, after your opponent sticks a 1 with the wind on a Jade Guardian for the 4th time, you just don't really want to play Magic. So anyways, kind of a long-winded answer, but I guess the short of it is, if I'm enjoying the formats, you can probably expect a lot of content from me. If not, I know there's a lot of people really like my content, and I really appreciate that. That really means a lot to me, and I'll try my best to motivate myself to make it. And definitely everybody's support and encouragement really helps. But it's hard for me to get myself to want to sit down and really think about and write about and record limited when I'm not enjoying it. I basically have to be enjoying it for me to feel motivated.
We need to teach you how to make bad content. Just bulk. Just get a bunch of videos out the door style. It doesn't have to be a 10 out of 10 type.
Yeah, it's just not really my thing. At that point, why am I making it?
Yeah, that's fair. Daniel wants to know, how do you think splashing is in this format compared to other formats? He says he's finding the temptation to go into a third color often results in more losses because of bad mana. Sometimes that's even happening to Daniel in sealed deck as well. You splashing a lot in the format?
Yeah. You have to pick up something to allow you to splash. I mean, there's nothing wrong with like 7/7/3 for a land base, but it's not great. So, but pretty much any time I pick up 1 or 2 fixers, I'll splash. I think it's a slow format. There's a lot of card drawing. You generally have time to maybe find your splash color. And there's such good splashable removal. Eviscerate, Blessed Light, and the red one, Fiery
Intervention.
Those all cost a single white or red or black to cast, and they all deal with bomb rares and big creatures. So I find myself splashing a decent bit. I wouldn't say I splash every draft. Like I play 2 colors more than I play 3 colors, but it's not a rare thing for me to splash. I probably splash in like 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 4 drafts.
That raises a even broader question than that. What do you think about that when the removal in a set is splashable, and how does that affect, how you approach a different color? Because, like let's say Eviscerate was 2 black, and we've seen that, by the way, the last few sets that the common removal spell has been 2 double black. And that means that if you're going to play black, it means you're going to get more of that removal spell. And later in the draft, where here, people can snipe your Eviscerates pretty easily from you and maybe makes you less incentivized. How do you view that kind of thing, when you look at the removal in a given set?
I like it. I think that removal is something that should be fought over. I don't think it's like, if you found black, you should just get to end up with 10 removal.
Okay.
It's good when removal's valuable. It's good when everyone has access to it. As your deck gets more synergistic, maybe you prioritize other things and don't take the removal. When your deck is less synergistic, then you need to rely on removal and try and draft card drawing or aggressive creatures and then kill their good stuff with the removal. So because removal's value can generally kind of go up and down, I like formats where there's a lot of removal. I like formats where there's good removal, and I like formats where the removal is easy to play.
Okay. John says, "Hey Ben, thanks for joining the podcast today. Is the green black Slimefoot deck you posted to Channel Fireball, the one you mentioned earlier, the best version of it, or would you make any changes like with picks or cards or whatever?" He says, "Thanks again."
Well, that's probably one of the best draft decks I've ever had. I'm sure it could be even better. I could cut my weakest cards for more uncommons and rares. I didn't have a Multani, I don't think. But Slimefoot is that deck's card, and I had 3 of them. And
you had 3 slime feet?
Yeah. And
dang, dude.
Yeah, that deck was really sweet. I was actually I think in the video you can see my emotion when I think I'm gonna lose. I think it was round 2. Game 3, I think it was, or game 2 when I was down a game, but definitely a game that would have eliminated me if I lost it. My opponent was reasonably far ahead, and I tried to keep it together, but I started to grumble a little bit, I think, because that was one of the best draft decks I've ever had, and I couldn't believe that I was going to lose with it.
Oh, man, that's crazy.
Yeah, and then I just drew out of it. I just drew a little bit better than they did. They hit a few lands, and I hit some of the power cards, and with how good the deck is, I was able to turn the game and go on to win. And it was just an awesome game and an awesome match. And I of course, got lucky from that point. But it was like really exciting and fun and just an amazing match. And so I don't really know how to answer the question so much because, I mean, it's a draft deck. It was a great deck, one of the best decks I've ever had. There are cards, like I would trade any card in the deck for Multani. But
sure.
But that deck in the video is definitely what a black-green sapling deck wants to look like. Even if you only had 1 or 2 slime feet, and not 3, it would still be a great black-green sapling deck. You could definitely look at that as a model of the archetype.
David says, "Hey Ben, can you quickly run down the top 5 draft formats in the modern era and why?" That's quite a question to throw at you on the fly here. But what are some of the formats that you've liked the most out of the more recent era, say the last 10 to 15 years or so?
I can answer that. I can remember playing the format, so I remember the ones that I loved. But the only qualifier I'm going to need is what is the modern era?
Yeah, I don't know.
I've been playing Magic so long. I mean,
I'm not.
The modern era could mean different things.
I don't know. I actually don't know. That's a really interesting question to like. David did capitalize the word modern, but that starts at what, 8th edition or something. So that's going back to when drafting was around anyway. I don't know. Why don't you just tell us the top 5 that you have, and as long as it's not like Mirage Tempest or some nonsense, then I think we'll be fine.
Well, those sets weren't very good for limited anyway. I think that the best run of limited and basically the best limited formats were from Champions block, Time Spiral block, which are probably 1 and 2 in my opinion. Mirrodin block before it, not the new ones, but the one right before Champions. And Ravnica, the original one after Time Spiral or before it, around that period. I think those 4 blocks may have been in a row. There may not have been anything in between them. It may have been something like Mirrodin, Champions, Time Spiral, Ravnica, or Ravnica and Time Spiral flipped. I don't really remember. But I think those 4 sets were just incredible limited formats. I think all 4 of them are fantastic, grindy games, lots of removal, value, morph. I really liked Mirrodin more than a lot of people because there was a lot of artifact kill and then a lot of artifacts and then still regular creature kill. So there was this tension. Plus there were synergistic decks, but the synergies could be broken up by all the removal. I like Champions a lot. Soul Shift, I think it was called, the one where when a creature dies, you get back a creature of lesser casting cost. Yeah. And Splice, the one where you could pay extra mana to add a spell to another spell.
Yeah, and so
allow
the
them.
Spell.
Those are both limited mechanics that I would say should be in a lot of sets that they should reuse because there's a certain type of one of them. The main thing that makes a limited set good is probably the mechanics because that shows up in a lot of commons and it shows up in almost every game. And those are the types of mechanics that allow for you to use your mana. If you drew a few more lands than the opponent, you can splice or you can recast creatures. If you drew less lands than the opponent, but enough to cast your spells, then you have more resources than them. So that creates this balance where the player who draws 2 more lands doesn't just lose. Instead, you have good games between a player who draws 9 lands and a player who draws 7 lands. And that's true of a lot of the other best mechanics also, like cycling. If you're stuck on lands, you can cycle out of it. If you drew a few too many lands, then you have these expensive cards in your hand that you wouldn't necessarily have been able to play if they didn't have cycling. Morph is another great mana sink. If you're stuck on lands, you can at least put out 2/2s. If you have a bunch of extra mana, then you can unveil these big creatures. Scry, another similar mechanic. If you need lands, you scry spells to the bottom. If you need spells, you scry lands to the bottom. So anyways, Champions is probably my all-time favorite. It's my number 1 because...
Would that be 3 times Champions or the whole block, or how did you...
So we are talking about over 10 years ago now, I think.
Mhm.
But I think triple champions, but I think the whole block was great.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, the third set had a mechanic where whoever had more cards in hand, they would get like a small bonus. Like you'd have a creature, it'd be like a 3-mana 2/2, and if you had more cards in hand than the opponent, it would get +1/+1. Or like if you had over 7 cards in hand or something, 7 or more, it would get +1/+1. Things like that. Imagine how great a game of Limited is when whether or not to play land 4 is a decision because you want to have more cards in your hand than the opponent.
That is really cool. Yeah.
You have to balance, do I draft this 5-drop? Because if I do, I'm going to need to lay land 4, but maybe I don't if I only have 1 until I draw it, but then I won't be able to play it for a turn. Oh, it was so strategic. It was just amazing. And then, like I said, Soul Shift and Splice mean basically you always have things to do. It doesn't matter if you draw a couple more lands than the opponent, but also because the cards are kind of powered down because they have Soul Shift and Splice, and since those are the abilities on the card, you can make a card like, say, 5 mana, 4/2 Soul Shift, whereas normally you couldn't make 5 mana 4/2 because it wouldn't be playable. You'd have to make 3 mana 4/2. So if your opponent is missing land drops and you have a 3 mana 4/2, you kill them really quickly. If you have a 5 mana 4/2, they have time to draw out of it and still play Magic. So basically, when you have stuff like Soul Shift and Splice, you get these like slow, grindy cards that just allow way less non-games. You can draw out of a mana stumble. If you're a little flooded, you have things to do with your mana. It just results in these awesome games of Limited.
Interesting. And these were kind of grouped together. So maybe there's a style of the people in R&D that you really liked, or?
Yeah. And let me answer that a little more. So I don't know if that counts as the modern era or not, because that's,
I think so.
Well, it's 10 years-ish after Mirage and Tempest and whatnot, but it's 10 years-ish before right now. From recent sets, I would say Hour of Devastation was really good. Cycling is amazing. I would say Dominaria is really good. I would say Rise of Eldrazi was pretty good. I don't even know if that's recent anymore, but that set was quite fun. Mm-hmm. Those are the ones that I think I've enjoyed the most. I've actually enjoyed some of the core sets a lot. The ones that had Titans were really bad, but there was a blue core set, I think, after the Titans left. Maybe they were still around, but there was like a bunch of playable counters and stuff. I don't really remember, but that one was really good.
There was M14 is the one that had Opportunity and Divination in it.
Right. And even though Opportunity was clearly a mistake in that set, the format was still really good. When people weren't casting Opportunity, when they were just casting Divination, it's a great format. Yeah. The advantage from Divination is not hard to overcome, even in the format where Divination is good. You spend 3 mana, you go up 1 card. A lot of times you go up a spell and a land from Divination, and the land isn't even that useful.
Right.
Opportunity is good in aggressive formats as a way for control decks to kind of take to win in the end and things like that. And it's often too slow and it doesn't impact the board and you're getting pressured. Opportunity should never have been printed in that format. However, the format as a whole was still excellent.
Yeah.
I played 2 draft GPs in that format and Worlds. And I remember I top 8'd the Grand Prix in Rimini, and then I 3-0'd the draft at Worlds, and then I played for and lost for top 8 in GP Oakland, and it was just a treat. I remember I actually 9-0'd the Sealed in Oakland, and I had something like 7 creatures. Well, 6-0'd. I had 3 buys, but my Sealed was not very good. I had something like 7 creatures. I had like a Millstone or something. I mean. Tim Aitan, who's a lot of people aren't familiar with him. Some are from Jeopardy, but he's a really, really great limited mind. He's kind of an old schooler like D Stern that, was really good. And before there was a lot of content and things like that. But I think it was him. It might've been someone else. This is going back 4 or 5 years, but he made the comment, I think, that's not what I expected a 9-0 deck to look like when, because they post the 9-0 decks and my deck just looked awful. But, the deck was actually like not great, like not awful. Because I didn't have broken stuff, I didn't have a high power level, but that format was just so grindy that if you were prepared for it and you played against people who weren't, and they were trying to rush you, and you had these grindy decks, and you could play these really sweet games. So, anyways, I really like that core set. Rise, Dominaria, Hour of Devastation. I'm trying to think if there's any other recent ones. Ixalan Block was pretty bad. Rivals was substantially better than Ixalan, but it was still pretty bad. Battle for Zendikar Block was really bad. What were the other sets recently? Well,
one of the ones that I wanted to, I'll read off to you a few of the recent sets here, just so we can kind of go back in time a little bit. There was Ixalan, like you mentioned, and Hour of Devastation, as well as Amonkhet was before that. Before that was Kaladesh.
Yeah, Kaladesh was okay. I mean, it wasn't great.
Yeah, with Ether Revolt after that. And then the one before that was Eldritch Moon and Shadows over Innistrad. If you remember that one. Eldritch Moon was fun.
Yeah, I liked Eldritch Moon. Eldritch Moon was good. That was another format where it was kind of low pressure, put together synergistic type stuff. I remember I actually top 8 the Grand Prix in Sydney, I think, in that format, and I was playing all these like enchantments to put on the white creatures and things like that, and a lot of people weren't really doing that because they just, you don't really do that in a lot of limited formats. But in that one, it was all about not having your creatures be blanks. And people were able to play a lot of value creatures because of their synergies with the what's the mechanic called where you would sack the creature to bring out these bigger ones? I
think it was Emerge. Is that what it was called?
Emerge, yeah. So people were playing like these value creatures, so you couldn't just get through with raw aggression, but there was a couple of enchantments you could put on them that would kind of activate your creatures once they were blanked by the big Emerge creatures and things like that. And yeah, that was a fun format too. I remember liking that one.
The one before that was actually one of my favorites in recent memory, which was the Khans of Tarkir, Dragons of Tarkir. Now, Fate Reforged, less so, but I remember Khans of Tarkir with Morph. I loved that format.
So I love Morph. I think Khans was one of the best sealed formats ever.
Oh, you really liked it as sealed. Interesting.
So when you have that much fixing, sealed becomes fantastic because everything is a choice. Do I play 2, 3, 4, 5? How many colors? Do I put in these 2 more tap lands to play this 1 more good card of my 5th color? I definitely can afford to. I have enough sources, but that'll up me to 6 tap lands. Stuff like that. When sealed is bad when you're pigeonholed, right? When you open your pool and you're just like, well, I have no choices. I'm going to play green and red because that's where all my playables are. Sealed is amazing when you have a format like Khans and you have all these morphs and all this mana fixing, and you could play you could play, because of course you're always going to be directed in some, I have a broken white rare and I have 7 good red cards. But so when you have that much fixing, it's like, it's not just, I play white red. It's, do I play white red blue, white red green, white red green blue? You have a lot to work through. You have a lot of choices. So I think Khans was a good draft format, nothing special, but one of the best, because in draft, a lot of that fixing kind of goes out the window. There's still aggression. You can only play so many tap lands. Cards that are really powerful gold cards trumping the monocolor cards. It's not the best in draft. Morph was still amazing, of course. Yeah. But in sealed, I think Khans might have been the best sealed format ever. It was a fantastic sealed format.
I want to get your take before we go to the next question on one other format. This is a little bit more back in the day, but kind of in between the two eras that we've talked about. It's one that was just on Magic Online and that people seem to really like, though. I admit I don't really like it, and I haven't really played it outside of a couple of times because it was before I started playing Magic again, but it's Lorwyn. It's one that's always lauded for being very complex as far as the board state goes. Are you into Lorwyn? Are you a Lorwyn guy?
I can't really agree with you there. So
which part?
Tribal. Oh, I thought you were saying you liked Lorwyn.
No, I don't. I've never drafted it, but people say that they like it. Yeah.
So yeah, here's my problem with Lorwyn. Tribal means you're barely drafting. You just get kind of sorted into a deck, and there's so high variance. If you're drafting green, you're drafting elves. So if you open an elf rare on common, your deck ends up being amazing. But if you don't, if you open a tree folk rare on common, then it barely does anything in your elf deck. Right. So it's kind of like there's 8 colors instead of 4. And so you just end up with these like super high variance draft formats where sometimes you put together this like unbeatable elf deck or unbeatable fairy deck, and other times you just see like a third tree folk, 2/3 elves, or a third merfolk, 2/3 wizards, or whatever, and your deck just ends up horrible, and there's nothing you can really do about it. So I think that tribal synergy often is bad. I think if you get it right, it can be good. Like, I think, like, for example, in this format, Saprolings doesn't require you to be all in on Saprolings.
Right.
The cards are fine. The cards are fine on their own. If you have a migration and no other cards that have to do with Saproling, that's fine. If you have a Thallid Omnivore and no other Saprolings, that's fine. If you have a Saproling and a migration, they both make each other a little better. It's not like you open 2 sapling uncommons, the sapling rare, and got 12 sapling commons and put together this unbeatable deck. Or you get 8 sapling commons, but no uncommons or rares, and your deck is awful. If you get 8 sapling commons, but no uncommons or rares, you have a good deck because the commons just synergize with each other.
Yeah.
So I think that all-in tribal formats like Lorwyn tend to be pretty bad.
Yeah, so like I said, I think I've drafted Lorwyn maybe once and I was just a little overwhelmed. Never have followed up on it, but the tribal formats have been traditionally my least favorite. And the more recent ones have been some of my least favorite draft formats ever.
Then we do agree. It's just whoever is liking Lorwyn that I'm disagreeing with.
That's actually why I wanted to ask you about it, was just because the points that it gets, the people that like it because they say that the board state's really complex. And I know that you're somebody who prefers to have a lot more decisions in game as well, like taking the draft portion out of the equation. But when it comes to the game, you're one of the more old school type players who says, I don't need this new world order stuff to make things easier. I want more complexity. I want more stuff tacked on. And apparently Lorwyn is kind of the peak of that, is that the board states are very difficult to suss out, even for pretty good players. But I think if Wizards never printed another tribal set for limited, I would be thrilled.
If I could ban some things from limited, it would probably be hexproof and tribal would be my first choices.
I would be voting for you on that. Next question comes from Drew, who says, Ben, you mentioned that it's better to draw first in this set if you're a control deck. If the 2 drops in the set were very powerful, would you consider playing instead so that you can syncopate or cast down the 2 drop on time and then have mana for a 3 drop the next turn?
That's a good question. I should talk about this a little bit. So firstly, if it's right for one player to draw first, it's right for both players to draw first. Sometimes you don't have the same information, but in theory, both players should either want to draw or both players should either want to play if you're playing a one-on-one game of Magic.
Can you explain that?
Well, I'm playing. Let's pretend me and you are playing now, Marshall.
Mm-hmm.
The player on the draw either has an advantage or the player on the play has an advantage, depending on whether it's better to be on the play or the draw.
Mm-hmm.
You can't get an advantage from playing while I get an advantage from drawing because we're playing against each other.
Right, a 0-0.
So, right. So, don't get me wrong, we may not have the same information.
Yeah.
I've seen matches where a player chose to play, the other player chose to draw, and then in game 3, the other player chose to play. And I don't necessarily think anyone did anything wrong because of the information they had.
Mm-hmm.
I've also seen matches where a player chose to play, the other player chose to draw, and then the player should have chose to draw in game 3 and chose to play, and they were wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't know the opponent's deck list, they don't know yours. So, you guys could have very different information. But anyways, that said,
okay,
the number one thing that makes you want to draw in a format is cheap removal. This is a little known fact from the past. There's a deck widely known as the most famous aggressive deck ever. It's called Sly.
Mm-hmm.
It was Jackal Pup, Mog Fanatic, a bunch of shocks and things like that. So it was super aggressive. It was the most aggressive deck in the format. And in the Sly mirror, it was correct to draw. It was an advantage, despite it being the most aggressive deck in the format. So that's counterintuitive. But the reason is because it was filled with all these shocks, so being on the play didn't accomplish anything. Because there's so much cheap removal, if I play my creature and then you shock it, and I play my creature and then you shock it, what good did it do me to be on the play? It's just whoever has more cards is going to end up winning.
Yeah, a good way to summarize that is, what if our whole deck was literally 1 mana 2/2s and shocks, right? That was the distribution of cards that we had. Well, you would clearly want to be on the draw in that scenario because it would become some type of an attrition fight at some point. And if you drew the same amount of lands, one person would have 1 card left over that the other one didn't, and that was the person on the draw.
Right. So it's not necessarily that if your deck is aggressive you want to play and if your deck is controlling you want to draw. There's a correlation, but it's really how much cheap removal either player has. The more cheap removal in your opponent's deck, the more you want to draw first. The more cheap removal in your deck, the more you want to draw first.
Okay.
So this format has Shivan Fire, 1 red, kills any of the 2 drops. Vicious Offering, 2 mana, kills any of the cheap creatures.
Mm-hmm.
So that's 2 different efficient commons. And then also, it doesn't actually have to be a removal if you can block. that's kind of the same thing. If every deck was all just 1 mana 2/2s, similar to if it was all 1 mana 2/2s and shocks, let's just pretend it was all 1 mana 2/2s, no abilities. You would also want to draw first because your opponent would play a 2/2 on the play, you'd play one on the draw, they'd attack and you'd block.
Sure.
They'd play another 1 or 2, you'd play another 2, and they'd attack and you'd block. So in this format, because blocking tends to be pretty easy, you want to draw first. And that's true both ways. Once again, if your opponent has great blockers, but you're this aggro deck, but they have great cheap blockers, choose to draw against them. Make them hit their land drops with 1 less card on their turn. Because the advantage for being on the draw is you have 1 extra card on each of your turns, which means you're that much more likely to hit both your land and your spell drop on each turn, because you have 8 cards on turn 1 to hit a land and a potential 1 drop. You don't play a lot of 1 drops in limited. And then on turn 2, you draw a new card. Let's say you just put a land on turn 1. So now you have 8 cards or 9 total cards to hit your second land drop and a 2 drop, and then 10 total cards on turn 3 to hit your 3 drop and your third land. Whereas on the play, you only have 7 cards on turn 1. You have 8 total cards on turn 2 to hit your 2 drop and your second land. You have 9 total cards on turn 3 instead of 10 to hit your 3 drop. So with more total cards, there's a higher chance that you're going to have both a spell to play and the land to play it. So it's kind of an advantage to be on the draw across Magic, and then that advantage is offset by the play first advantage, which is getting to attack 1 turn sooner. If you're on the play, you play your 2 mana card, your opponent plays their 2 mana card, then you get to attack, and they only have a 2 mana card out on your third turn. If you're on the draw, if you play your 2 mana card, they get to play their 3 mana card on turn 3, and then you'd have to be able to attack with their 3 mana card in play with your 2 drop. So basically, the times you want to play the most are when attacking first matters, basically when creatures can't block each other and it's going to be a race, or when one deck is just really slow but really powerful. That's what we see in Constructed. The power level is generally very different between the decks in Constructed, so you generally have so both players want to play, because even if you're a control deck in Constructed, your opponent is trying to attack you with their 2 drop and attack you with their 3 drop before you can play your 4 mana Wrath of God effect, before you can play your 5 mana Planeswalker or 5 mana big creature. So you, as the control player, want to play because you want to get your Wrath of God out 1 turn earlier, but not necessarily a turn earlier. That's not the right verbiage, but while you've taken 1 attack less. And you want to be able to get to the Planeswalker and play while you've taken 1 attack less. In Limited, if the creatures can block each other and there's cheap removal, I believe you should be on the draw. And I believe people don't draw first nearly enough in across Limited. I've often felt like I've had a pretty big advantage in a lot of sealed formats, especially, and even some draft ones, by drawing first while all my opponents have played. There's a lot of formats where that's not true. I'm not telling everyone draw first in every draft format, because if the creatures can't block each other, then you need to be on the play. So in formats where there's mechanics that make blocking difficult, or in formats where one player is going to have flyers and one player is going to have ground creatures and you're racing each other, which is a lot of Limited, then you want to be playing first. But in formats where they throw out a creature, you just block. Even if they have a trick, it's not like a 2-for-1's you. They just spend their turn killing your blocker. You just on tap, play another one. They attack, you block. In formats like that, if you can envision them blocking your creatures or you blocking theirs, things just lining up where blocking is not made difficult by the mechanics, probably, or there's cheap removal, you probably want to be on the draw.
Okay. Yeah, it's really good stuff. Mark Donaldson with perhaps the most important question here. Would you rather fight 1 Yargle-sized squee or 100 squee-sized Yargles?
It's the same answer as before.
Which is? If
I fight 1 giant person, before it was 1 Gabby, it was like 1 Huey-sized Gabby or like 5 Gabby-sized Hueys. If I fight 1 giant person, I could land a lucky shot. You know, I mean, people are not made of steel. Huey would most likely beat me up. 1 Yargle-sized squee would most likely beat me up. But I could land a lucky shot. I could get in that 1 knockout punch. You know, they could get tired out chasing me and just run out of steam. I can't beat 5 people in a fight, whether they're smaller than me or whether they're squees or whether they're Yargles. I can't take 5 of them. It's not going to happen. So I'll take the 1 big one over the 5 small ones.
All right. Last question here of the show comes from William, who says, and this is a very important and broad question that I want you to tackle for William and any other listeners who may have a similar one. It is a topic we've talked about on the show before, but he says, this isn't a Dominaria specific question, but I really wanted to ask a seasoned professional this for a while. When, if ever, do you choose to forfeit and go on to the next game or round, meaning concede here? You lose 100% of the games you concede, but sometimes I feel like it can be a good idea to concede so you have enough time to play out and win game 3. I've started making myself play until the final points of damage kill me, since it forces me to be more considered and to avoid rage quit mentality, which negatively affects my play in future rounds and games. What are your thoughts?
So this is a tough question, and it's one that I might differ from a lot of pros on. I think that people, even in a competitive tournament setting, often make a bad choice to try and get every inch of percentage they can get. Ultimately, keeping your mind fresh, keeping yourself happy and enjoying what you're doing helps allow you to play better Magic. And enjoying the experience is very important, even on the Pro Tour. As I've said, the money in Magic is good, but it's not life or death. If I concede away a 1%er, let's say, on the Pro Tour, that maybe has a negative equity of $20 or something. So you don't do that for no reason, but if I'm feeling a little bit of a headache or a little bit tired, or it's going to be a long day, it's only round 2, and I want to go get a cup of coffee or get some fresh air, I have no problem with conceding away like a 1% chance to win. So I can't really give you an exact answer. As far as the time thing, that's a good reason to concede. If you think that you're, let's say 1% or less to win, but if you play this out, it might take another 10 minutes and it's already been 20 minutes and there's not going to be enough time to finish the round. That's a good reason to concede strategically. Also, everybody's, let's say, mental stamina is a little different. I'm 34. When I was 18, maybe I didn't need to concede and go for a walk and have 20 minutes to not think, and clear my head for the next round. And now maybe I do. Maybe you're 18 and you're fresh and sharp and your mind is going, or maybe you're 34 and you need some time in between rounds. I can't say that there's an exact formula for when you should concede. I would say that if you're not enjoying it, and you have a very low chance at winning, there's nothing wrong with conceding. Don't let people tell you have to get every single fraction of a win percent you can. In a perfect world, maybe, but in the real world, there's just not that much at stake. And I don't think that people are going to be more successful in tournaments, competitive tournaments even, if they grind themselves into dust, chasing every little inch percent they can get. Now, don't get me wrong. You can't go the other way with this. You can't be like, oh, well, I have, in order to enjoy it, I'm going to play this completely unplayable deck in this competitive tournament, because then you're going to go 1-3. And if you do that several times, you're not going to enjoy it. Right. So we're talking about situations where you have a very small chance of winning, probably 1% or less, but it is conceivable that you could still win this game. If you want to concede. I don't think there's a hard set of rules. I would personally not keep playing if I thought my chances of winning were so low that I would rather be doing anything else, because if I have something else to do that I'd rather be doing, then I'm not going to enjoy Magic and the tournament and the game if I sit there and keep trying. So
yeah, it's interesting because it feels like a cumulative effect type thing, right? Like if you snapshot it on one match, you would say, hey, you could sit there for 2 more turns and let your opponent attack you, and you just draw your 2 cards, and then you don't get there, and then you lose, and you go, good games, and you pack up and off you go. And you say, look, what's the big deal? But there is an effect that can accumulate over the course of a day, or maybe even longer if you're playing a 2-day tournament or something like that, that can, like you said, you can grind yourself into dust. You can absolutely do that. And I mean, I'm a proponent of not conceding under most circumstances, because look, I don't sit down and expect to win every game, right? So if it doesn't work out for me, I don't have like emotional, collapse saying, well, I deserve to win this, or I thought I was going to win this. I say, no, you're going to win. I'm going to make you do it. The times when it really, so this is the interesting part. You're saying, in my opinion, you're one of the best in the whole world at being able to look at a game and understand where you stand. You could give, like, I would side with your percentage guess over anybody else's, even though I recognize that these are all just guesses and none of us really have like a super firm grasp on the actual numbers because it's too complicated to figure out. But still, I know how your brain works, and I've talked to you enough about this type of stuff that I would let you do that. But what if you're not that good at that? I mean, I've seen people go, well, I'm just dead, right? And I'm going, you literally have an out in your deck that wins you the game here, or that, completely resets this board and gets you out of this. Like, there is one out of the 26 cards left in your deck that you absolutely stand a great chance to win the game, but you conceded because it wasn't looking good, or your opponent was way ahead or whatever. Those are the ones that are real stingers, right? And that's where somebody like you, Ben, would understand I have way more than 1% chance to win here, even if it doesn't really feel like it, even if I've been behind the whole time, that kind of thing. Those are the ones that I hate to see.
Yeah, and definitely concede with caution because, like you just said, no one, including me, can calculate your actual odds. And I threw out the number 1%, which, means you have no outs. You'd have to draw perfect or something while your opponent bricks, because you normally have a 60-card deck and it's the middle of the game, so you have a 40-card deck or what have you. So if there was a single copy of a single card you could draw to win you the game, you would not have an out. So if you can think of a single card, if you don't know your whole deck through and through, if you're not sure, then yeah, just play another turn or two. And everyone is totally different on this stuff. Some people can maybe shut their mind off and keep playing so that it's not really expending resources, let's say. I can't do that. If I'm playing, I'm thinking about what outs I have, what combinations of draws my opponent can have, not even my own deck, my opponent's deck, where then I could draw certain things to then match up better than those things, to then make certain plays, any plays I can find to give myself a chance, an out after that or something like that. So that's why I'll concede, because if I sit there for another 3 turns, I'm churning, like, what combinations of cards can they draw and I draw, where like, and then what plays do I need to make to turn that into possible win? And if I can come up with things that aren't ridiculous, like 5 straight for them and me or whatever, then I'll keep playing. But when I can't come up with things for that, I don't want to keep churning unless I'm playing for top 8, unless it's the final game or something. Like I said, I just want to be able to shut it off and relax for 20 minutes and then come back fresh for my next match, because Magic tournaments are generally a long race. They're not a sprint. You can take 2, 3, 4 losses and make top 8 or have a good finish. And you have to play a lot of rounds. You play all day, basically, in competitive tournaments. I mean, every tournament is different, but in Grand Prix and Pro Tours, you're talking about 9 rounds, 6 rounds, 8 rounds, long days, multiple day tournaments. And another thing with conceding that we didn't touch on, you also can give away information sometimes. If it's game 1 and there's a 5 mana card that says destroy all creatures in the format, you don't have that card, so you have no outs. You're not even 1%, you're 0%, let's say. I mean, like you said, everyone's always guessing, but let's just say you're 0%. Your opponent has out 25 power and toughness over 5 creatures, and you have out 2 creatures of 8 power and toughness, and they're at 18. You just have no outs, right? But let's say they have 1 card in hand that they drew this turn, and everything else is on the board. Let's say there's a 5 mana Wrath of God effect, and you have 5 mana. If you concede, you're communicating to a smart opponent that you don't have that Wrath in your deck. And that's important information in Limited.
That's right.
That can be, for a thinking opponent, valuable information in some closer games of Limited when you're up, but you're not up that much. So there's a lot to think about. And you certainly, if you're trying to win, you certainly don't want to concede often when you would have won, like, at all. Ideally, you're conceding in game 1s or maybe 2s to save time sometimes to finish a game 3, because a draw is pretty bad. The way tournament Magic is set up these days, X2 is top 8 in Grand Prix. Pro points are paid out by a match record, with a draw being roughly the same as a loss. So for the most part, if you can concede to save time, you can do that with a little bit more leeway, even if you had a 5% chance to win a game, or 10% maybe, but you would probably not have time for game 3 if you didn't concede. You could certainly consider conceding. If you're conceding for personal reasons, just to kind of save mental energy, like I do sometimes and things like that, then you have to know yourself. You have to have a good understanding of your chance to win, and how long the day is, how you're feeling, how much you're enjoying it, how much is at stake. I would say there's not going to be any hard and fast rule, just understanding the guidelines and what's at stake, making sure that you're not really communicating valuable information to the opponent, like conceding in a game 1 when there's a wrath effect that you could have cast and things like that. Not conceding in game 3 unless you're sure you're almost likely going to lose. Doesn't have to be 100%, like I said, but I don't think anyone wants to travel to a tournament, prepare for a tournament, and then concede in game 3 when they had an out, when they had a 3% chance to win. All they had to do was draw their top card or top 2 cards and see if they hit their out. So, if you're sure you have no chance, that it would take something absurd, some absurd combinations that you can't even think of, sure, concede if you want to. But there's not really any easy answer that you can give on that.
Yeah, I tend to be on the never concede side of things, and that's obviously not direct advice, but the mentality of being like, I'm not going to just concede, like you're going to have to turn your creature sideways. And the main reason for that is because unless you're a professional player like you are, very experienced, there's going to be loopholes and things that you may not be aware of until after the game, or you may never figure out. And, one of the examples I have is I was playing in a side draft once against a player, a very good player, in fact, a Hall of Famer. And I had passed the turn back with 1 or 2 mana available, maybe just 1. And my opponent showed me a card that would win them the game. And like as a courtesy type thing. And I was like, thought to my head, I thought, well, my baseline is that I'm just going to make you kill me. Right. Like I just do that as a matter of course, because it takes 2 extra seconds and no extra thought. And it's just like, okay, that's cool. Just kill me. Right. But then I thought about it and I thought, and the truth is that card did kill me. Like, or I was dead to that card with the card that I had in my hand. But I thought about it, and there was 3 cards in that set that made it so that I didn't die, that I could cast with the mana that I had available. And I had 2 of them in my deck. As it turns out, not in my hand, but in my deck. So I'm just like, okay, that's cool. Like, go. Right. And then my opponent tanked for a while and didn't kill me. Right. So I actually got a chance to draw one of those cards out of it. And it would have been very easy given how far behind I had been in this game. This is one of those games where my opponent had a good start and was able to keep that lead for the whole game. The one where you kind of feel like you're losing and losing and losing, and your mentality is kind of like, this just isn't going right and I'm just going to lose anyway. And then when they show you that card, you're like, yeah, okay, you got me. But remember, they don't know what you have in your deck or your hand or whatever. And a lot of times people concede because of what they know themselves. They say, well, I'll ask a friend. I'll see a friend do that, concede in a situation like the one that I found myself in. And I go, why did you scoop? And they go, well, because I was dead. I'm like, your opponent didn't know that. You had 2 cards and 5 mana available. Make them, just at least make them kill you, because like I found myself in this situation, I got a draw step out of it because I didn't concede. My opponent gave me a draw step. Now, of course, there's no justice in this world and I bricked and I lost anyway. But that to me is a major win, right? Like I got an entire draw step out of this. That's a lot of flexibility. And I did actually have 2 clean outs that would get me back to square one in that one. So that's why I tend to default, because I didn't know that.
What you just said, what you just said is just another good kind of sub point where like your opponent showing a card is not casting a card. So if you have outs to that card, it isn't cast just because it's in their hand, right? Like, let's pretend that you were at 3 and they flashed you a lightning bolt. If you had no counters or life gain in your deck, they're not going to take lethal from you before they bolt you. Maybe they won't bolt you this turn, but they're going to bolt you before they take lethal from you, so you could concede. On the other hand, if you're playing blue-white and you have counters in your deck, even if you don't have one in your hand, they didn't bolt you. They showed you they had a bolt. If they choose to do something else, then you get to untap and draw. Maybe you draw a counter spell, and then maybe you go on to win the game. So it's like you said, never concede is a baseline because it's hard to know your chances. But also, even if you're conceding away some small chance to win, sometimes that's just worth it to you. So
yeah, totally. And I agree. You want to be on both sides of it. I think the key is to understand yourself, right? Is to understand what it is that you know and don't know. Another quick example is I was, before the last big Modern event, I was practicing on Magic Online a bunch, and I was playing this Through the Breach Emrakul deck, the blue-red deck. And I was playing it a bunch, and I found myself up against Jund, and I had sort of fallen behind on board a significant amount, and I was facing down lethal from like 3 different creatures. It was like Tarmogoyf, a Bob, and something I can't remember, maybe a an ooze or something like that. And my opponent was at 16, and I had finally drawn my 5th land to be able to cast Through the Breach and Emrakul. And I thought, well, there's nothing I can do. They'll sack a bunch of their lands, and then they'll have their creatures left over, and then they'll just kill me. And I'm just like, well, there's no harm in just doing it. I'm just going to do it. So I did, and I attacked, and I just F6 and passed the turn, just thinking I'm just going to make them, again, just on the notion of, well, you have to kill me or whatever. And then they attacked me, and I looked, and I'm like, wait a second. And I remembered that since I had to sacrifice Emrakul, I shuffled my whole graveyard into my library, and Tarmogoyf shrunk by like 3. And now it wasn't lethal anymore. And that's the first time that I had come across that with this particular deck. And I was like, right, of course. Like, Tarmogoyf stands a very big chance to be smaller after I do Emrakul. And I won the game. Like, I actually just won that game because I was able to do it again the next turn. And I thought, oh, I was so close. But I really thought I was dead. Like, and this was a month ago. This was me now. This wasn't, and it was just because, again, I hadn't seen that interaction. So it was because I didn't know something. Right. And that's the most dangerous thing where, again, is why I default back to
Magic is hard. I mean, we see Magic is hard. Like, you're giving me a lot of credit. And I mean, yeah, I deserve some of it. But nonetheless, Magic is hard. Like, everyone's seen me make mistakes in videos or in matches. And everyone's seen top pros, the best players in the world, whoever, PVO, and doesn't matter. Everybody makes mistakes. Magic is really hard. Yeah. So, yeah, of course, if you're seeing top pros like us make these mistakes, and of course you might forget, the Tarmogoyf's going to shrink, or somebody at home might forget that there's a 5-mana Wrath in the format and that they're giving pretty valuable information away when they concede in game 1. So, yeah, it's hard to remember everything. So I would say have a good reason if you're conceding because you really want to be somewhere else or getting something to eat because you're going to be hungry before the next round and there's 15 minutes left on the clock or whatever. But don't just make it a habit to concede all the time when you think you're losing. Concede kind of, what's a good word? What's a good term for this? I've never thought of this. Strategically, yeah. Concede strategically. Concede because time is running low or because you're really not feeling good or you really could use a break or whatever, but don't make it a habit to just concede anytime you feel like you're going to lose because sometimes you don't. Like I was just talking about in that black-green draft video, I had an amazing deck. I really thought I was going to lose to the point where I started to get a little depressed in my video because I was just like, wow, like I'm going to lose with this amazing deck that I was so proud of and I'm recording. Like this is going to be awesome and now I'm going to lose. And like then I won a game I didn't expect to win.
Yeah.
And that happens all the time. So just make sure that you're conceding very mindfully, very strategically when you're conceding, that you're not just conceding because you're losing.
All right. Well, good stuff, Ben. We're going to call it there. Thanks a lot for taking the time to answer questions from me and our listeners as well. Can you tell people where they can find you on social media or any other stuff that you've been working on?
Sure. They can find me exclusively on channelfireball.com as far as Magic content. I'm proud to be on their team, representing the site. And like I said, I've really been loving Dominaria, making draft videos and writing a lot, putting out a lot of Dominaria content. As far as on social media, I'm on Twitter, BenS8528. I try and tweet about Magic. Occasionally you're going to have to hear something about basketball or politics or what have you. But I'm definitely pretty engaged in a lot of the Magic community discussions and things like that about the format or about issues. So check me out there if you want.
Great. And thanks again, Ben, for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love doing the show.
We want to remind you, of course, that the show is brought to you by the site that Ben was just talking about, channelfireball.com, the best site on the internet for everything you need Magic related, including awesome free content from people like Ben, Paulo, others. And also, it's, of course, where you want to go to buy your stuff. It's also where you want to go to sell your cards back. If you have a pile of those draft rares, everybody has them. You do some drafts at the beginning of a format. Maybe you go out to a pre-release. You end up with some rares. You're not going to use them necessarily, right? Like, if you're not building a standard deck or whatever, they're just going to sit there. And by the time they rotate, they're going to lose all their value. Don't let that value go away. You can sell them back to Channel Fireball. And if you trade them in for store credit, you get 30% bonus. I mean, we're talking about taking that junky pile of rares that you're not going to use, turning it into a booster box that you can draft with your friends. It's a great deal. And hey, if you don't want the store credit, that's cool too. You can just get cash, and who can't use a little extra cash every once in a while. So make sure you check out Channel Fireball for those things. If you want to find me on social media, Marshall_LR. Like Ben said, he's BenS8528 on Twitter. And you can find everything related to the podcast at LRcast.com. That is going to do it for this one. We'll see you next week. Okay, Ben, are you ready for this?
What do you got for me?
All right. So last week we had a big celebration episode. We had episode 4 for 1, right? So one of the biggest values you can get in limited is a 4 for 1. And we had all of our old co-hosts back on as well. So 4 co-hosts on one show. And we did a Let's Stump Vargas. This is a game that we play sometimes with Luis. And I ran them through the same pack, and I'm going to put you through it too. You've been on the show a bunch of times. You're an honorary co-host at this point, and we're going to see how you stack up against the others. So I'm going to read you card names. These are all from the same set, and in fact from the same booster, though I took out some of the cards, so it's not a full booster worth. And you have to tell me what the cards do, just based on the name. This is really hard, and Luis makes it look really easy. Are you ready?
He's a lot better than me at stuff like this, but I'll try.
Okay, here we go. First card, Blood-Crazed Neonate. Do you remember what that does?
I feel like it's not the 1-mana 1/1 that Dredge plays, right? That's Insolent Neonate or something?
That's correct.
I have no idea.
Okay, that's 0 for 1. That's the 1 in a red 2/1 vampire that must attack each turn, and if it hits the opponent, it gets a counter. All right, how about this one? Rotting Fen Snake.
Sounds like some kind of black creature with a green ability or something.
Oh, you're so close. It is a black creature. This, and by the way, this is Innistrad. This is original, just regular old Innistrad is the pack here.
See, it's unfair for me because I didn't like that format nearly as much as most people, so I don't play a lot of Innistrad.
And all of my co-hosts love that format. That's actually why I picked Innistrad for it.
Yeah, open a Champions Booster and ask us those. Yeah, I don't remember.
All right, it's 3 and a black for a 5/1. All right, you have to remember this one.
I do remember that card. Yeah.
All right, how about Abyssinian Priest?
Okay, I think that's a colorless and a white. It's a tapper, like it's like a 1/2. You can pay a colorless and tap a non-something creature, like a non.
That is correct. You are getting credit for that. Do you remember what the non was? I'm giving you credit either way. But.
Let me think. Probably non-human.
That's right. You did it. All right. Look who's on the board. This one is Grave Bramble.
Grave Bramble.
I'm going to give you a hint on this one, though. I don't know if this hint actually is something that will hit for you. This card was an homage to another game.
Yeah, that doesn't help.
Yeah, I didn't think you'd play that other game.
Is that the green card that destroys like an artifact or enchantment or something?
No, it is green though. It's the 1 green 3/4 plant with defender and protection from zombies. This is an homage to Plants vs. Zombies. If you've ever seen that game.
No,
this is hard. Is this not impossibly hard?
It's very hard. Yeah.
I'll tell you what Luis got on this in just a minute. Next one is Brain Weevil.
Okay, I think I remember that one. It's a 4-mana 1/1. You sack it and make the opponent discard 2 cards.
That is correct. Is there any other information that comes to mind?
Yeah, it has like Intimidate or something.
That's exactly right. Oh, I don't understand. How do you get that one right?
Well, it's a common, and it was like actually, you know how I got that one? It's really funny. I think Luis was playing in a limited GP once, and he like I'll never forget this game because his opponent was like burning him even though he was at 20, and on one turn he sacked a Brainweevil, and the opponent discarded Geist Flame and some other spell, and the opponent could have just Geist Flamed it on the opponent's turn. I think that's what it's called. Geist Flame's the 1 red, deal 1 to a creature. Yeah,
and then 3 in a red flashback. Yeah,
and it was at a Grand Prix, and I just had finished my match like sooner. It was like on day 1, I was playing and everything, and I just like walked over and was watching, and that happened. So I think I'll always remember Brainweevil, but I remember the Avacyn Priest because it was just a good limited common 2-mana 1.
Yeah, I know that is funny. Do you remember Nightbird's Clutches?
I mean, I haven't played Innistrad since Innistrad like rotated. Like I didn't really like that much. So what's the name of the new card?
Nightbird's Clutches. It's a bad limited card. It's really bad.
Nightbird's Clutches. Is that like some black flyer, like a 5-mana 2/2 or something?
No, it's 1 in a red sorcery. Up to 2 target creatures can't block, and you can flash it back.
Yeah,
for 3 in a red.
I never played that.
Yeah, it's terrible. This one is Tormented Pariah, but you have a hint. It has a back. It's a flip card, and the backside is called Rampaging Werewolf.
I do remember that one. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get the back. I know it's like something like a 4-mana 3/2 white creature
that's right.
It just flips like werewolves or whatever.
Yes, that's correct.
The back, I think, is a little bigger. It's red, I think.
That's right.
And maybe it like paid 2 colorless to pump it, or that might have been a different one.
No, this one's just the vanilla one. It's a 3/2 that becomes
like a 5/4 or something.
I'm giving you credit. It's 6/4,
6/4.
but you're getting credit for that. You knew which one.
Yeah, I remember it's
all
on
right,
a 3/2 that like flips.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. You have 2 uncommons and a rare left. First uncommon, Lantern Spirit.
Give me a second. I think I remember that one. It's like a 3-mana 2/1 flyer that you can pay a mana and return it to your hand or something like that.
Yes, that is exactly it. Oh, babe, you know what? You just evened up. You are now 4-4. This is interesting. I thought we might have a disaster on our hands, but you've shown yourself because
if you opened a better pack with more limited playables, I would remember them better.
All right, then how about this one? Butcher's Cleaver.
Yeah, that's their locks it on Warhammer of the set or whatever. I don't think I'm going to get it necessarily exactly right, but I know it's like a 3-mana equipment. It gives like +3/+0, and if it's human, it gets something else like trample. Or it always gives trample, and if it's human, it gives first strike, something of that nature.
How much to equip?
3, I think.
You're so close. Yes, it is 3 to equip. I think God, the listeners are going to kill me if I give this one to you, but I think I'm going to. As long as equipped creature is human, it has lifelink.
Lifelink, okay.
Remember, this is the one you put on the stupid unblockable hexproof guy?
Right. You put it on an invisible thing. I mean, if everything else was there, that's pretty close. 3-mana equipment, 3 to equip, +3/+0, and gets a bonus if it's human. I mean, we are talking about it 7 years ago now or something.
Let's see. You're right, 7 years ago. I gave it to you. You're at 5-4. This is the decider to see if you're going to stay above 50%, and it's a hard one. Though I will take shorthand for the rules text on this one. It's a card called Back from the Brink. This is your rare.
Ugh. This sounds like another unplayable limited card that I never used.
No, this is kind of a sweet one, actually.
Back from the Brink?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is hard mode, though, I will say that. It's a little bit of an obscure rare. Oh, this will help you. I'll read you the flavor text.
Yeah, right. I don't do flavor text. I've probably never looked at the flavor text of a card in my entire life.
It says on Innistrad, death is just a career change.
I mean, it's called Back from the Brink, and it says that it has to bring creatures back from the dead. I don't know. Like,
that is true. That it kind of does do that, actually.
But I really have no idea what card this is.
Okay, so this is the 4 blue enchantment. And you can exile a creature card from your graveyard and pay its mana cost to make a copy of it at sorcery speed.
Yeah, I still don't remember that card.
I didn't either when I saw it. All right, well, Ben, you know what, buddy? You went 5-5, and that is a respectable finish. And I'm proud of you, man. Nice work. That I blindsided you with this. So, Luis. So, Brian Wong went 8-2,
nice.
And Luis went 9-1.
Yeah, that's sick.
And the other 2 went 6-4. Just insane.
Yeah, I mean,
all right, Ben.
Yeah, I mean, it was a long time ago, but if I was playing Innistrad drafts, I think I could handle it.
Definitely. We'll do champions next time you come on.
Sweet. I probably still won't remember it because I'm always doing Dominaria drafts these days, but I would like my chances better.